Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast with Dotun Adebayo and Tim Vickery.
Welcome to the Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast with the Legendino Tim Vickery in Rio. Ready to go, Tim?
Yes, yeah, especially because this fair city is where in 1999 I had the pleasure of meeting and interviewing Ange Postecoglou.
Good, and we're going to be talking about Ange Postecoglou. So that's a warning to all you Gooners. If you don't want to know the ending, look away now, because we're, as well as Tim, of course, we've got a very special guest who's just written a book called When the Final Whistle Blows, Glory, Grief, and Tottenham Hotspur. As somebody once said, Andrew, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
As somebody once said, good grief, Christina. I bet Tottenham never heard of rock and roll. Andrew Pettifer, great to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, your book is about a season in Tottenham Hotspur's history, and interestingly enough, it was a very well. How should we describe the season? Certainly, it was eventful.
I've heard it described as a season like no other, and that was certainly the case.
Obviously, you couldn't have known that when you started writing the book. It's the jeopardy of writing a book. Is look, I don't know how this will end, but when you started, what was the reasoning behind? And this is last season. We're talking about the 24.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 24-25. So I'm British. I come from North London. That's why I was born a Tottenham supporter and never really had a lot of choice in the matter. But I've been on the planet for 60 years now. That was the reason. The original title of the book was Season 60. And I noticed, Tim, that it's the same for you. You were born the same year as me.
Yeah.
Being now living in Australia, I've been here since 2007. Obviously, really interested in the whole Ange Postecoglou angle, and a big fan of Ange's. Actually, I was at the Olympic Stadium in Sydney when he won the Asia Cup. You might remember Sonny scored at the end and it went into extra time and so on. So anyway, big fan of Ange, and I was really optimistic at the beginning of the season that it was going to be a glorious
the beginning of his first season or the second season?
No, the second season.
He only wins in his second season, Tim. It's his second season you've got to look at, yeah.
That's right. And he actually said that really early on. I was just looking back through the book, and it was only a few weeks into the season he made that comment. But my thinking was, I got the writing bug, and I thought I'd love to write a book, and an interesting way to do it, and actually one that would be relatively accessible, was just to write it week by week through the season. So I didn't have to plan, I didn't have to think what the story would be, the narrative arc, all that stuff. I would just write the story of the season, and in my mind, the season was going to be a glorious one. It's going to be fabulous, and all the Spurs fans are going to want to flock to buy my book and relive a glorious season. That was the thought process, right, at the beginning of the season. Of course, it didn't turn out really like that at all, actually. But that was the thinking.
Yeah, I can hear the thinking, almost feel the thinking. A good friend of ours, Andy Brassel, did a book similar in format because he followed a year in the Champions League season. I always thought that was a risky game for a journalist, but I suppose with you, at least, the passion's already there. So half of the issue...
Well, the risk is higher, though, isn't it? Because in the course of a Champions League season, you've got so many teams there around which to form narratives. Here you've got only one. And let us imagine that the season is restricted to mid-table mediocrity. You haven't got much of a story to sell, have you?
Well, no, I wouldn't. It actually got to that point, really, around the end of February, kind of March time. I almost gave up the whole pursuit because, everything was going so badly. And there's no real jeopardy for me, frankly. I mean, the reason I'm doing it is because I retired. I used to be a consulting engineer and had the good fortune to be able to, retire and travel, which is what my wife and I do now. So it was really more of a hobby than anything. So, there was nothing to lose, But having put quite a lot into it, you really want to see something come out the back end, right? So, but as I say, come February, March, I nearly gave up, but I kept going just really because the Europa League thing was still out there. That was the only reason.
Yeah, Tim was being a bit generous when he said mid-table mediocrity. We all know how it ended, but we'll come to that. Actually, there were two endings. You can choose your own. And I'll ask you which one you're going to choose later on. Obviously, I will. But what I was going to say was, because you've got the passion, because you're following Tottenham Hotspur anyway, you've solved half of the conundrum for any writer, which is, how do I keep the enthusiasm going to the end? Even if Tottenham are doing really badly, you're still a Tottenham supporter through and through.
That's true. And the other thing is, I've got 60 years of being a Tottenham supporter to draw on. So when you read the book, you'll see that I kind of dive back into the 1981, the semi-final, where there's this. I don't know if many people know, but there was a near disaster at the Leppings Lane end. Hillsborough, and I was right there. My dad and I were sat in the front row, and it was just to my right. So telling stories like that, another one I bring up is the Ronnie Rosenthal night. I don't know if you remember that, Tim, when he scored a hat trick, and he hardly ever scored a goal. Old Ronnie Rosenthal, but Southampton, a cup match, So I look back on some of these memorable matches that from the past, and so it's a bit of a mix of a journal going through the present, but also looking back at some of my experiences as a Spurs fan over 60 years.
Yeah, and many memorable moments. You kick off with Lucas Moura. He did one good thing in his Tottenham career. He did, and everybody remembers it because it was an amazing goal. Let's face it.
Yeah, and it's similar actually to Ricky Villa. Right, in 1981, and one of the things I talk about is how people look through sort of sepia tinted, glasses at the players of years gone by, and they were all brilliant, and they weren't. A lot of them were pretty poor. I mean, Ricky Villa was a pretty average footballer. Now the only reason he came to Tottenham, of course, was to keep Ardiles, give him some company. But he scored. Possibly the greatest cup final goal ever, or certainly one of the most memorable ones, and that's what everyone remembers him for.
Yeah, because I moved away in '94, and that's very different, I think, probably from leaving England in 2007, in terms of following the football. Because when I moved away '94, you just couldn't keep. There was no internet. You couldn't keep in contact. You couldn't do it. You're not watching the games on TV. Yeah. I used to, you had to wait a few days, but I used to then go into the offices of the English consulate just to pick up the newspapers to read the match reports.
Wow.
You get the score in the Brazilian papers on the Monday morning, so I'd have a look at the scores. But to find out about the game, I had to wait a week or something like that, and then read the papers in the British consulate. So it was very hard to stay in touch.
I think it changed quickly through the first decade of the century, because I arrived in Sydney 2007, and some of the Hotspurs guys who were the founders of they talk about the early days in the early 2000s when you might get the occasional match. The match highlights on the telly and this sort of thing. But, of course, now we get a better service in Australia than probably anywhere, actually.
Yeah.
We can watch every Premier League match live, on demand, in various packages of highlights whenever we want. It's perfect from that point of view, other than the time difference, of course. But you're right. It's changed dramatically.
I used to walk around in my wallet with a match ticket, because people would ask me, "What's your team in England?" and I'd say in that blank look. So I used to get out the ticket and show them.
Yeah.
And you get some vague looks.
So one of the things I do talk about in the book is that dramatic globalization, and as I said, we do a lot of traveling, and we were in Peru last year, my wife and I, we wanted to go to the Galapagos for my wife's birthday, which we did. And when we, we're in that part of the world, we went into the Amazon. We wanted to go into the depth of the rainforest. So we did that, and we flew into the Amazon, then we went on a bus ride, and then went down a river, and eventually arrived at this really remote place. And there was a guide there, and I had a Spurs shirt on, and he said to me, "Tottenham Hotspur," and he said, "Very good team." He said, "Son, great player." In the middle of the Amazon in Peru. You really, it's everywhere now.
Did you ask him how many tourists from North London had been there before you?
No.
Not terribly funny.
But you don't have to, because that's not the connection anymore. The connection, it's hit him through TV screens. I remember this is the moment it really clicked for me. I was wearing this, and all it's got is the crest. There's nothing else. And this must be, I bought this in about 2013. So it's around then. I remember going into a bank, and the bank security guard, now that's minimum wage job, so he hasn't got a great deal of access to the outside world, but he had enough, because just looking at this, he knew what club it was, and he knew the last game, and he knew the next game. Yeah. And I thought, wow, this is so different from '94 when I came. And that globalization thing it is remarkable. How much do you think, Andrew, that's changed the club? I mean, the club that you fell in love with and you grew up with, do you still see the same thing today?
No, not at all. Funny enough, I was just reading another passage just now before we came on, and I make that point that there's the only thing that's left from those days is you still see Pat Jennings and Martin Chivers knocking around, some of the old legends, as they call them.
My generation.
And the Tottenham High Road, which never seems to change despite gentrification of the whole of the rest of London.
The
Tottenhm High Road still the Tottenham High Road, right?
Well,
but apart from that, everything has changed about the club, of course. So it is completely different. But in a way, that kind of doesn't matter, because it's a continuum, a legacy of something that's really important. And that thing, one of the things I talk about in the book is, what is this thing that we're all passionate about? Why are we passionate about it? Does it really matter? And I think what I conclude in the end is, yes, it does matter, because it's about human connection. It's about legacy. It's about, you and I have never met before, but we can talk about games that we both witnessed, in the 70s and 80s and so on, So it's that part that it plays in sort of society, which, despite all the bricks and mortar changes and the players change and the chairman changes, etc., there's still that line that runs through it, which is the important thing, I think.
This leads us, I think, to something which is very important to the heart of our discussion. What is it? What is that essence? And maybe it's a different answer for everyone. I mean, I'm from Hemel Hempstead, which is kind of Tottenham catchment area. Yeah. But my old man was a Tottenham fan, in as much as he was a fan, and he loved football. He couldn't really understand being a supporter. Couldn't really understand that. He just wanted to see a game. But Tottenham was his team, because he was living in Woolwich at the time when Woolwich, but the football of the 50s just absolutely enchanted him. He could see the birth of the double side, and he just had an idolatry for Danny Blanchflower, so on. And Blanchflower is such an important figure, and a forgotten figure, I think, in some ways, but that line of we got our new tactics, we equalised before the other team has scored, and the thing that it's all about glory. No, it's not about win. It's about glory. Now that I've always taken that as being really, really important, really important. So the club, for me, has to represent a style and a swagger. It has to do that. I'm not actually that, trophy. I'm a little bit trophy schmofy, because I'm a terrible supporter anyway, but I want to feel represented. And what I don't want is just dull workaday mediocrity. I don't want that. I want something grandiose. I want something. There are things I love, and I think this is still the case. When most clubs boo their old players when they come back, most clubs. At Tottenham, you really have to blot out your copybook, Sol Campbell or something like that. Most of them who came back. And I remember, say, Tony Galvin, his first game back, welcome to our old friend Tony, and the whole stadium on its feet for Tony Galvin. And I saw that more recently with Peter Crouch. I was at one of the Wembley games. It was one of the last times I was back, and I love that. It's just different, and the game that which provides the centerpiece of the book, the Europa League final, the trophy. It was unwatchable. It was one of the worst games I think I've ever sat through. It was absolutely dreadful. So this leaves me this whole leaves me a little bit conflicted, because there's part of me, there is part of me honestly that would rather go down gloriously, all guns firing, than win such a terrible game of football.
That's why I know it's nostalgia is a wonderful thing, isn't it? When I look back at the 1981 Cup final, right? 1-0 up, 2-1 down, win it 3-2 with one of the best goals ever scored at Wembley. That's glory, right? That's what we want to see. We don't want to see a load of turgid, mistake-ridden play, which is really what that final was. That you're not wrong about that. But that thing about glory, I think it goes to the I guess why a lot of us, particularly Australians, were really excited about the Ange thing, because I think he tried to do glory.
Yes, yeah, he did. He did.
In the end, he failed.
Yeah,
and succeeded. Whatever way you look at it, right?
He succeeded. He succeeded by failing.
Yeah, yeah. But he gave it a good go, the Tottenham way, and following on from the three previous coaches we'd had,
exactly.
That's why I think there was this real, even although the second half of his first season was pretty poor, actually. That it got off to if you remember, a really strong start. And
I remember the start, the first season, the start. I was at one of the games. I took one of my stepdaughters. It was a Fulham game in kind of October in that first season, and the place was in absolute ecstasy. It felt like
I was there the first game of the season when we beat Manchester United 2-0, and you're right. And I've not felt an atmosphere like that for decades. There was this genuine sense that we were back where we wanted to be as a team. We were, the ethos of the club had come back, and I think Ange brought that. He gave it a go anyway.
My favourite team, if I look back in, we've all got favourite teams. My favourite team is probably 86, 87, that didn't win anything, that nearly won everything and didn't win everything. Yeah. It was so beautifully Tottenham. That team, so it was a glorious team, and obviously fell between all the possible stalls at the end and ended up winning nothing.
Yes, that's right. I was at that cup final, the Coventry.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to interrupt this on never mind me. One of the interesting ways that you format your book is by going through the season match by match and giving us a match report as it happens. What I find intriguing is you're watching this in the middle of the night, these matches, because you're watching
sometimes. But as I said, we can watch on demand whenever we want. So my rule generally is if the kickoff is up to midnight, then I'll watch it live. So midnight till 2 in the morning, I'll watch. But if we're kicking off at 1, 2, 3 in the morning, I go to bed, wake up in the morning, and I can put the streaming service on and watch it as live. So that that's the way. I don't know the score. It might as well be live. So that's what I do. But what I tried to do with those match reports was just, it's not intended to be, a football tactics analysis or anything like that. It's really just a little bit of a reminder. As when people read it, they'll think back, oh yeah, I remember that game. And I tried to find something.
That is exactly how it works. Sorry to cut you. That's exactly how it works. That's exactly how I read it. So it works.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I tried when I set off. I tried to be quite light-hearted, and I make some jokes about the teams we played in the Europa League and stuff. And then you'll see that the mood of the book, if you like, evolves through the season. Partly because we started to play so badly and we got the frustrations around the football, and then later on, of course, this storyline emerges of my good friend and Cameron, who was our leader of the Spurs supporters in Sydney, who was coming to the end of his life, which is how the grief part of the story ended up coming about. So and then the book, of course, ends with this incredible confluence of glory and grief, and that's which is obviously where the subtitle came from, of us finally winning a trophy, and then for us in Sydney losing, one of our good friends, and it all happening around the same time. And it was only actually when that all came to pass that I finally decided, yes, I need to put this book out, because it made it, all of a sudden the whole thing made sense. It felt like it had a reason. It felt like it was meant to be. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and the season started off so well. You got 4-0 victory, was it, against Everton? But arguably the moment where I see that things are starting to go wrong, going through your match reports, is when you lost against that Woolwich Wanderers team. I mean, they're not even a Premier League team, are they? And but at that point, I mean, I remember I for my sins am still in the middle of North London, so I get to see both sides of the story, as it were. The Woolwich Wanderers to one side of me, and the other lot to the other side of me. And I remember, because I talked to Tim on a weekly basis, and he was like, "Yeah, Ange Ball, Ange Ball, Ange Ball." I kept thinking, every time I step out of the BBC, I'm surrounded by these security guards who are all gooners, and they kept saying to me, because they see me as a spud, because I grew up in North London. That's where I saw my first games of football, and they like saying
it might be something to do with the fact that you got that jacket that you're wearing off the video for Diamond Lights by Hoddle and Waddle. I think that might have something to do with
it. That's what it was. Yeah. So I'll wear it more often in that case. But anyway, they kept saying to me, wait till Ange Postecoglou and Ange Ball comes to us lot, and let's see what happens then. And it was played at the Tottenham Stadium, as I recall, that first game. And you invite Arsenal, the enemy, to your stadium at the beginning of the season with a new manager. He's got to win that one, hasn't he?
Yeah, and then that was quite early in the season. It was the equivalent of last week. It was the match before the international break. And yeah, we huffed and puffed and never blew anything down, and then let one in from a corner and we're never going to score. So that was very disappointing. I actually think more significant was the game at Brighton a few weeks later. We were 2-0 up at half time and lost 3-2 and went out with a whimper. And that was a really big blow. And we never really, I don't think, recovered. We had some amazing wins, 4-0s, 4-1s, Man City away, 4-0, So in that first part of the season, it really swung around. There were some dreadful results and some fabulous ones. And you could still hang on to the whole Ange idea at that point. But as we got to Christmas and beyond, and I know we had injuries and stuff, but it got to the point where you couldn't really kind of get any sense of what the tactics were at all. It's like, what are they even doing out there? And that's why I think a lot of us really kind of lost faith.
I mean, the only time that I saw him in the stadium, early in that first October in that first season, the game against Fulham, and it's different when you're in the ground. It's different. You got a different view of the whole thing. But I remember coming away from that thinking, and 2-0. It was 2 mistakes from Shirley Bassey, I think, that Tottenham had punished. 2-0. But I remember thinking, this is gloriously insane what he's trying to do. But and the whole thing is dependent on an absolutely magnificent pair of centre backs.
Yeah,
Romero and Van der Ven. And then the pair of them getting injured. You're thinking, my God, what's going to happen now? And we saw, didn't we? The idea kind of it could no longer, as an engineer, the foundations have gone. Yeah. How can you build on no foundation?
Yeah, but you've got a risky structure to start with, right?
Yeah.
So if you had a really strong, broad-based structure, you take a couple of elements away, you've still got a strong structure. If everything goes like that and you take the bottom away, you've got nothing, right? And that's kind of what it felt like.
Yeah. I mean, to give him his dues, he didn't lose against Man City last season, and people expected them to win the title, didn't they? And he didn't lose a single game, so that he can be that effective. However, certainly by Christmas, I kept saying to you, Tim, come on, man, he's got to go. And you said, no, give him some more time, give him some more time, give him some more time.
Keep the faith, yes.
It's those matches. I remember very well. I'd forgotten the Brighton one, but when you say it all comes flooding back to me, and I think that was the first big shock.
Yeah.
Because you should have walked away with that one. I think, was it 2-0 at half time as well? I remember.
Yeah, it was
2-0 at half time. Anyway, but
somehow it's even worse to lose like that than to lose just 2-0 in a pedestrian way, isn't it? It's even worse when you've got victory in your grasp.
Of course it is. But where did it really go wrong? I mean, it's easy to say, okay, both Van der Ven and Romero get injured. I know it's a big blow, but for every team, what you expect of the coach is to readjust. But Ange kept playing the Ange ball, and I wonder whether there's something, kind of psychological about it. Because now he's gone to Nottingham Forest. If he
I'm not
sticks
sure
to
whether he did, Dotun. I think that'll be really interesting to see what happens with Forest, because you got to a point where there was no sense of Ange ball. I wouldn't have minded if they, come January, February, okay, we had injuries and stuff, but if you could see what they were trying to do and they were still trying to do Ange ball and failing, that's one thing. But it didn't even look like that. It just looked like a whole load of players who didn't know what they were doing, to me anyway.
Because you expected a lot of them. When you introduce a new system to them and then you start sort of putting them out of position, they're already nervous. And then
it's also action and reaction, isn't it? I mean, it seemed, and what he was doing with the fullbacks when he started, it was, in comparison with what we'd had before when, the Conte thing, it was so rigid. And suddenly you're seeing the fullbacks pop up in a penalty area. So what are you doing there with it? So the fullbacks are cutting in and the midfielders are going out to supply width. And it's all kind of gloriously unstructured until you take the foundation away. And I share Andrew's opinion. You wonder towards the after Christmas and so on. You really wonder what on earth was left of what was he doing? Do you think maybe he got the kind of thing of Ange ball proved an impediment to him because he couldn't find once the opposition had responded to what he was doing? Was he too wedded to it? Could he not find another way out?
Yeah, it certainly looks like that. I mean, I don't like to just sit and bag the guy because I actually really like him. I think he's a great character. I think he's great for the game. We love him in Australia for everything that he's achieved. And in fact, my wife and I have very differing opinions. She's threatening to become a Nottingham Forest supporter because she still loves Ange. Yeah. But my personal opinion is that they did him a favour by sacking him because he will always be a hero at Tottenham. You wait till he turns up with Forest, he'll get a standing ovation. If they kept him on, they would have ended up sacking him, is my view, sometime between now and Christmas. And, because we were mid-table or less, and he'd have gone as a failure. So I think they actually did him a favour. He'll always be a hero. He'll always be welcome. We all love him. That's great. And now he's at Forest. Good luck.
I loved him in '99 when I interviewed him for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because it was my first real indication that an Australian will either answer a question saying, look, yeah, or yeah, look. You just choose one of those two variations. And the other reason I loved him is I was doing it, this was for BBC World Service, and we were doing it just down the phone line in one of the kind of like pay phones that they still have one or two in Brazil, not very many. And to kind of insulate the noise, you've got this massive plastic covering that looks like a big ear, hence the fact they're called big ears. So, I'm holding the receiver to ask the question and then passing the microphone, passing the receiver to him and so on. And in the course of doing that, he just beat his head really hard against this plastic covering. Really hard. I could see him wince, but he didn't miss a beat. He just carried, look, yeah, look. And he just carried straight on. So I thought, yeah, you'll do me. You're all right. So I've kind of vaguely followed his career ever since. So it was really funny when he came, to my club. So I was behind it. Maybe, as Dotun is insinuating, I was probably behind it for longer than I should have been.
No, do you know? I like the guy as well. For the record, I think he probably will do quite well at Nottingham Forest, and perhaps without the pressure or different kind of pressure than he faced at Tottenham. the pressure at Nottingham Forest will come from the chairman. I doubt if the pressure at Tottenham came from Daniel Levy, the now departed. At what point did you realise that Tottenham was facing a potential relegation? No, I'm not. I mean, for real. At some point,
I never believed that.
No, you genuinely, you never believe that.
No, I'm with it. Never.
Not last season, no.
Never in the field of the Premier League season.
We are all old enough to remember when Tottenham were relegated. I remember it. And again, I was at school in North London, and I can say all the Gooners reminding me that Arsenal have never been relegated. So anything's possible.
Although technically they probably shouldn't be in the first division, but that's another story.
Well, you've got to go a long way back in history for that one.
Yeah. Yeah, but they bought their way in at the end of the First World War. They hadn't done it on merit, and they've been there ever since. It's a true story.
Yeah. No, look, can we not just focus on Andrew's book?
No.
Do you mind?
Good idea, Dotun.
Yeah. Well, at what point, and is it clear in the book, did you fear that things could go even worse than 17th position?
I did never contemplate that, and that's because we had 3 teams in the league that were clearly going to end up below us.
That's all we need.
And so that never. I discuss, is Ange going to keep his job, and what's the situation with Levy and all the protests and all that sort of thing. But no, the relegation was not really contemplated.
Tim touched on this slightly earlier on, and what you do is juxtapose the matches from last season with your memories of going to Tottenham from a very young age.
Yes.
Obviously, with the new stadium, those memories are barely recognisable in the it's a very different landscape. However, what's your abiding memories there? I have a few from. I think your old man got you a season ticket from the age of 10, but you've been going from about the age of 5. Am I right?
No, probably 7 or 8 would have been the first time I went.
So, what's your abiding memories of those first times?
Those early. One of the matches I talk about in the book, and probably the most exciting atmosphere that I can remember, was actually a relegation dogfight. Back in, I think it was 75. We played Leeds United at home. We had to beat them to stay up, basically. And I think we won 4-2. And it was the match where Alfie Conn sat on the ball at one point. I don't know if it was a famous image. Yeah. He was just trying to waste some time, and he was quite a character. But the atmosphere that night was just phenomenal. It was a nighttime match, and under the floodlights. You've got to win to stay up. We beat, and Leeds were the reigning champions. As somebody said to me recently, that the reason that they didn't trial that hard was that they actually had a European Cup final coming up. And I think that was the year that their supporters pulled all the seats and threw them on the pitch. Do you remember that?
Yeah, the riot in Paris. Yeah.
Yeah. But that was the night that really sticks out for me from that era. It was. And that, and then you think about the year in the second division, and a lot of people of my vintage would tell you that was a brilliant season. We won a lot. We got promoted. We won 9-0 once. And this sort of thing. So those years for me, 75 to 81 was really the golden period. So that was from when I was 10 to when I was 16, and then the 81 Cup final, and it was never going to be any better than that.
See, you're from that generation that remembers when Spurs used to win things.
Yeah.
Even when I arrived in North London in 1968, they were still echoing the heavy double season of course. 62 or 61, whatever it was. And people still talking about Danny Blanchflower. Bill Nicholson.
Yeah, Bill Nicholson, of course.
Yeah, he was still very much a totem for that area.
But he was still the coach.
Still the manager till about
73. Yeah, I remember seeing him many times in the dugout and otherwise. And but people were still talking about that era. And even during that time whilst I was there, I think, did you beat Chelsea in the FA Cup?
67.
67. Well,
the
that was
final.
the year before I arrived there. Maybe I arrived in '67. Yeah, I was 8 years old. Yeah, maybe I arrived in '67. That was it. And then you've gone on to win. So you won the FA Cup, the League Cup as well, I think.
There are a couple of, yeah.
71 and
Couple.
73. What became
Ralph
the UEFA
Coates.
Cup in 72. Ralph Coates in 71. Yeah.
Well, the point I'm making is that you do. Tottenham was seen as the team in North London for me, from my side in North London.
So certainly a cup team. We've always in a good chance of winning a cup. And when you stop and think about it, 17 years for a top club like Tottenham not to win a trophy is staggering.
And also the League Cup hardly counts, does it? And for me, it's
well true.
It's
sure about
it's no, not really. It's it's very
Really?
secondary. Yeah, it's 91 for me, the FA Cup, the last serious one.
Yeah.
So it is a long time. Now you've obviously got all those effective memories of being in the stadium. Now, because of the time difference, are you ever watching the games in a bar with other Tottenham fans, or is it always at home because it's the wee small hours in the morning?
I know you've got to read the book, Tim. You've got to read the book.
Yeah, you got to read the book.
Was it the Surrey Hotel?
The Surrey Hills Hotel is what we call our spiritual home in Sydney. The nice thing about supporting Spurs in Australia is we have a national supporters club, Australia Spurs, with a national committee, which I now sit on. And we oversee, there's something like 12 or 13 chapters now. We call them chapters. So each of the different sort of cities and urban centres has a group, which is called a chapter, has a chapter organiser, and they're the one who let everybody know when we're meeting up and so on. So, and of course, Sydney is one of the biggest, and we have a pub where we always go, and we've been going that long, and they've been loyal to us, and we're loyal to them, and now there's a lot of sort of Spurs memorabilia, around the bar, and that's where we go. And unless it's a really ridiculous kickoff time, then they will always be showing the games. And as I mentioned at the outset, the number of people who turn up is very variable. I've been there where there's only been a couple of other people on some occasions. And yet, if it's a Gooner game at a decent time, say it's a lunchtime kickoff in the UK, it will be sort of 9:30 in the evening, then it will be absolutely rammed. There'll be 200 or 300 people in there. And then for the UEFA League final, I think we had close to 500 people. It was a ticketed event. It's amazing how Spurs supporters crawl out of the woodwork, when we start to be successful. And that goes back to this thing about community, and kind of where I end up in the book is to say, look, at the end of the day, the idea was to track my own emotional journey. But really, when you think about it, that's not actually that important. What's more important is the community, and it's a big global community, but it works at different levels. So in Sydney we have cohort of people and we're all good mates and we come together and watch the games, and that's really the essence of what being a football supporter is about. I think not just what it does for me, but what it does for us, if I can put it that way.
Fabulous opportunity for you to tell us a little bit about your friend who passed away 3 days after Bilbao.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. So, Cameron, as I mentioned, he was our chapter organizer for Sydney, and he did it for about 8 years. For many of those years, he was battling cancer, and in the end, he got to the point where he didn't feel he was well enough to do that role. But because of that, he was obviously well known and well loved by people in Sydney, but also because Sydney's a global city, people are passing through on holiday or come and live here for a while and come and go. And anybody who went to the pub to watch a Spurs game would have met Cameron. So he was very well known, and he and loved by many people. Really quite a humble guy. Spurs was a really big part of his life. And very sadly, his cancer got to the point towards the end of the season where it was clear that he was reaching the end. And in Australia, we have voluntary assisted dying, which I know is being talked about because, in fact, I've been in touch with the Dignity in Dying people in the UK just to sort of share the story, because I'm having witnessed that now through Cameron. I'm very supportive of it as a policy, if you like. And he decided that his last day would be what turned out to be the Monday after the Europa League final. I think that's pure coincidence. I was asked the other day, do you think he chose it because it was the end of the football season? I don't think so. It just happened. It kind of was. But nevertheless, it was 4 days after the Europa League final. So on the night, as I mentioned, there was 500 of us in the pub, and Tracy, my wife, and I were in the pub because we were part of the organising group for that. But 3 of the guys that are involved in Oz Spurs in Sydney actually went and watched the match with Cameron in his in his hospital bedroom. Bear in mind, it was a 5 a.m. kickoff for us, and we were in touch with him through text and so on. And for us, it added another layer to the whole experience. We wanted to win, but we wanted Cameron to witness that as well, in his last days, and that came to pass. So that was a good thing. And it was, as I said earlier, it was only at that point I thought, well, this book's starting to make some sense now. It's got this natural kind of narrative arc that suddenly emerged of the starting optimism, going down and coming back up to something quite remarkable. But I didn't want to tell that story of Cameron without getting his permission, because it's his story, it's his life, So on the Saturday after we'd won, and 2 days before he died, I went to the hospital and saw him, and we had a chat. And I said to him, look, I've been writing this book. It's about my emotional journey through the season, and my emotional journey is now tied up with your situation. Would you mind if I include your story in the book? And he said that, the one thing he said to me, he said, will you give a copy to my brother and my mum? I was like, well, that was the easiest thing I could do. And of course I would have done that anyway. But nevertheless, so yes, he said that was fine. And of course I didn't want to profit from that whole situation. It just didn't feel comfortable. And I never did this to make money anyway. So I said to him, look, I'm going to dedicate the book to you, and I'll donate any proceeds to the hospital, and they do a lot of cancer research. So the first thing in the book is there's Cameron, is my dedication to Cameron. As hopefully, if I can persuade the Spurs community to get behind this and buy the book, then we might raise a decent amount of money, which I'll be able to give to the hospital. So that's how that all came about.
Well done, you. Positive story. We're coming to the end of this conversation tonight. How can people get hold of the copy of the book?
So it's on Amazon. All you have to do, jump on your Amazon wherever you are in the world. You just search When the Final Whistle Blows, and it'll pop up. And you can buy ebook is, I don't know, £6 or something. It's nothing. And the actual paperback's £14 or something. So,
sure.
I hope people will get behind it. I think it's a good read, and for a good cause. So that's what you do. Jump onto Amazon.
Quick 5 questions before we go. What was the best match of the season for you? What was the match that Tottenham played best in, or the best match of Ange Postecoglou's last season there?
Probably the 4-0 away at City. I think you'd have to say that was a great performance.
And the worst? Woolwich Wanderers.
There's lots of competition.
The most, yes, there was a lot of dire stuff in there. Probably the most disappointing was the Brighton one because we were 2-0 up at half time and capitulated and played so poorly. It wasn't like Brighton came out and played brilliant football. Our defence just sort of collapsed. So, but then you've got Ipswich at home, and it's just too many to think about.
I hated the Ipswich at home just because Ed Sheeran was there. And my Brazilian wife, she just loves Ed Sheeran, so she ended up cheering for Ipswich. And that nearly, because we've been together nearly 30 years, but we ain't going to get to 31 if she keeps doing that.
She carries on like that.
How tempted were? Go on.
I keep telling my wife that, and she's a gooner, and she knows I can't walk away from her. I keep saying it's not a joke, but hey.
How tempted were you to come over for the parade? I know it's a long way, isn't it? Yeah.
Season, we had our annual national get together in Sydney, And this is one thing that we do every year. And so we had a big celebration happening that weekend. So that I would rather spend my time with, my mates in Australia celebrating. We had a boat on the harbour and a party, and that's how we did it. I do remember the 1981. I keep going back to that because it was such a glorious thing. I do remember going to the parade for that, and it was just fabulous. And this one looked great as well.
Mate, Tottenham High Street ain't going to change for a while, although Tottenham have done a good job in owning the real estate. They've got a huge chunk of it, as you well know, and that has changed the ambience slightly because they've got a lot of like colleges and stuff around there, so they've got a lot of community stuff. I'll give them that. I won't take that away from them.
That's good. And the stadium itself is fabulous. I mean,
it's amazing.
I mentioned I'm a consulting engineer and I do buildings, and that's a wonderful, wonderful building.
I spoke to the woman who was the engineer for it, chief engineer for it, and she goes around the world building stadiums. And I said, compare this Tottenham Stadium to the other ones you built. And she said, look, the latest one is always the best one because you learn from all the others. And I think you can see that Tottenham just doesn't have a lot of the issues that some of the other, even the Emirates to a certain extent has some issues, but Tottenham just
not quite true though. You look at the new Everton Stadium, like it's shiny and new, but it's not a patch on the Tottenham one.
Yeah. Well,
there was a level of ambition, and go back to the levy thing. There was a level of ambition for that project to create something really outstanding that was driven by him, and I think everybody recognises that's his legacy really. A lot of years with no trophies, but we've got a great stadium.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of money. Got a lot of money, and impacts on the local community, etc. as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The books, When the Final Whistle Blows, Glory, Grief, and Tottenham Hotspur. In that season, it was a lot of grief, but some glory at the very end of it. And would you take that, the position in the league for that trophy? Would you take it? The humiliating position in the league, 17th, for a trophy that, you talk about the League Cup not being much of a trophy. Well, I would argue the Europa Cup isn't either.
Yeah, I'd take it. Yeah, not again though. As a season, and the season that I chose to capture, it kind of all added into the story, right? So I had a really interesting, like I mentioned earlier, you would describe it as a season like no other, and that's great. Would I want to live like a season like that again? No. I watched every minute of every game, and a lot of it was really poor, really poor. So no, I'm fully behind Frank. We've got some exciting new players this year. Let's get back up the top of the league.
And of course, you could do a part 2 with Thomas Frank, can't you? He's demanding it. Is it? You did all. Oh, sorry. Let me put on my Danish accent. You did all that for Ange Postecoglou. I mean, really, mes frères. What are you going to do for me?
Yeah,
they signed some decent players for him, haven't they? To be fair.
Yeah, could have signed 1 or 2 other players for
if
him.
they want to play for the Arsenal, then let them play for the Arsenal.
Yeah, exactly
it's no loss. No loss.
Yeah, he's
let them be happy elsewhere.
He's got to come to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I'll be as close as I can to watching that one. If I might even be there. So you never know. Hey, Andrew, it's been amazing. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
No, absolutely. It's really nice to meet you guys. And on our travels, Tim, next year we're actually passing through Rio. Would you believe? So
our paths will cross. When are you coming?
Yeah, it's end of March or beginning of April or something. But I'll let you know. It'd be great to catch up.
Be fantastic. Look forward to it.
Yeah, and if you're passing through London at all in your travels, holler so that we can do this again or catch up.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Thanks so much for having me on and helping publicise the book. So obviously it's a dear to my heart, not just I wrote it, but because of what we're trying to do with the charity and so on. So let's hope people get behind it.
Andrew Pettifer, thank you very much. This is the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. We're on live every Wednesday and Thursday, generally at 4 p.m. But look at your socials, and otherwise we'll be hollering at you. Tim, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Get in touch with the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast on Twitter at BrazilShirtPod, or you can email us brazilianshirtnamepod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and tell a friend. The Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast is an 1129 production.